Welcome to the 40k Parley. This is Book 1, Chapter 1. Should we make it sound official? Like it's some part of the Imperium or something like that? I think I'm going to keep it a little shorter and a little sweeter on the first episode. Just give you a little bit of the introduction into who I am and the whys and hows a little quickly as to how I got into this hobby. First and foremost, my name's Ben, and everyone calls me Red or Red Dog, and I'm really into movies. I went to school for film. There's really not much to say there. I just really like movies. The weirder the better, most of the time on that front. I'm really into comics. I like DC, Batman, Superman, Cyborg, Green Lantern, Black Adam, Suicide Squad, Sinestro, classic Spawn. Really got into comics a lot during the Nightfall arc when I was younger. I'm really into Lego. I'm a bit of a free builder. I wouldn't call myself a master builder, but I'm definitely artful with my Lego, to say the least. I like building fauna, mainly bugs and insects, things like that. I really like WWE. I grew up when it was still WWF in the Attitude Era. My favorite wrestler is Glenn Jacobs, a.k.a. Kane. Big fan. I still watch it to this day, usually on Friday nights. No matter what I'm doing, SmackDown can usually be heard on in the background. As far as gaming goes, I'd say the most consistent thing I've ever done gaming-wise, as far as, I don't know that it would be necessarily considered a tabletop game so much as a TCG, but I'm really into Magic the Gathering. I started playing in '96. I think I was 15. A little after Ice Age, I think Alliances had dropped when I started playing. You can still get things like Fallen Empires in the store. Mirage was the first core set I remember being released, and then Vision after that, or Visions rather. I've been collecting MTG off and on for a very, very long time, almost 25 years. So as far as tabletop gaming goes, I've got a little bit of a history with tabletop, and not so oddly. A lot of it has been related to the Games Workshop system. I have two older brothers. They played Dungeons and Dragons, so me and my younger brother, of course, we wanted to learn how to play. I don't think they showed us how to play, at least not me, until I was 14. And it was a lot of math for me, and I remember being 14 and just feeling like it was a lot of homework on top of what I was already doing for homework at the time. And I don't know, I didn't think that the creative benefit of Dungeons and Dragons outweighed all the statistics that I was doing at the time, so I just kind of never really got into Dungeons and Dragons. I tried playing Vampire the Masquerade a little bit in high school with some of my friends, and I did a tabletop and LARP, and it was just more something to do socially than something that I truly enjoyed doing. In high school, even before high school, I played Hero Quest from the Milton Bradley and Games Workshop crossover here. I don't know if it made it across the pond, but in America, it was awesome. It was definitely a big deal on the tabletop circuit. And I remember we must have been 13, 14 playing that. All of us it was like a sleepover, event. One of us would, set the whole dungeon up and read through the books, and we actually ended up picking up White Dwarf magazines around that time when we could at hobby shops, or occasionally there'd be a mall where we'd be traveling and we'd stop in and there'd be a Games Workshop and we can grab a White Dwarf from them. But mainly my experience with White Dwarf early on was for Hero Quest, just buying it for the extra missions and all the fun stuff that it would add to the lore of that game. And that was always a really, fun thing. I remember playing Battle Master. A buddy of mine had that, and we had nowhere really to play it. And his mom had a king size bed, so we would set it up in his mother's room on her bed to play Battle Master. I mean, it was just such a big game. And I believe that was another Warhammer Milton Bradley crossover here in America. And like I said, I don't know if it was across the pond as well, but we definitely had it here, and it was fun. It was just a lot of setup, and which sounds like a funny thing to say now that I'm playing 40k, where you have to literally build your models, paint your models, and then play with them. So it's, yeah, kind of a completely different experience. There's Space Hulk. I found out about that through White Dwarf, and I grew almost obsessed with it through the artwork. It was just so awesome seeing the Gene Stealers fight the Terminators. And I think it must have been about 97, because I think I was 16. I ended up picking up Space Hulk, and I bought Warhammer Quest, which was kind of like Games Workshop trying to resurrect advanced Warhammer Quest in a way, but allowing it to have randomized dungeons, and you didn't need a DM to play, and it was co-op, and it made my tabletop gaming group pretty popular in high school for a little bit, because I mean, nobody had to DM, and we could all just sit around and hang out and run through the missions, and we would all take turns playing the monsters according to the rules of the rule book, and everybody just had a blast. Warhammer Quest was a great game. But Space Hulk, like I said, I think reading White Dwarf and seeing all the artwork as a young kid, as a young teen, I really wanted to play it. And when I got it, we punched out all the minis, and we push fit most of the ones that we could together. And this would have been the '96 second edition of Space Hulk. And we played it probably only a dozen times, but each time it was so much fun. As soon as you'd get into like your second or third game, and you didn't have to sit there and keep looking at the rules, and by the time you'd played your fourth or fifth game, a couple hours had gone by, and you didn't even mind because you were having so much fun, either just randomly placing the tiles or playing some of the predetermined missions that were in the second edition rulebook of Space Hulk. I played a couple of the Warhammer video games. I think the first one was Shadow of the Horned Rat. I really enjoyed that for the PlayStation. There's not much more to say about that. There's probably been a handful of other Warhammer video games I've played over the years, and I can't really say that I've liked too many of them. I remember playing, what was it, Fire Warrior for PS2. I believe that there was another Warhammer game on PlayStation that wasn't Shadow of the Horned Rat, the original PS1. I had one on the 360, and it was an RTS, and it was made for a mouse, like to point and click with a mouse, and it just did not translate over well to a 360 controller. I want to say it was pretty early in the 360's lifespan, maybe first or second year. It was based on the original Warhammer franchise, and I have it somewhere, and I just don't remember it being anything too great. There was a lot on the 360. There was a very flooded, very saturated game system, very much like the PS2, or it just seemed to have this never-ending grind of video games that came out for it. Anyways, so it's a little bit about me. Like I said, the big ones are comics and Lego, Magic the Gathering, and movies. And like I said, I really enjoy watching WWE. As of recent, I've been playing Warhammer, and that's what this podcast is going to be all about, is Warhammer 40k. I'm not putting my fingers in Sigmar. I haven't played any of the other games, Kill Team, Necromunda, Horus Heresy, anything like that. I just got into 40k about 5 months ago. Almost 5 months now. I've been in the hobby, and it's just been absolutely awesome. I will say that it's been quite an interesting journey, and it's inspired me to do this podcast. And let me get into maybe a little bit of the reasons as to why I started playing. First and foremost is JT. He's a good friend of mine, and he came to me when he was 17 and asked me to get him, take him to the store because he wanted to get into Warhammer. And at the time, he and I were playing Magic the Gathering together. And I said, oh boy. So I was like, this is an expensive hobby. Oh man, like this is going to be something. How do I, talk a 17-year-old with no job out of playing Warhammer? And somehow I succeeded. And I said, look, this is an expensive hobby. And pretty much I told him, you play Magic, and if you need cards, just, let me know. I have Magic cards. I've been playing forever. So I talked him out of actually getting into 40K. And here we are 5 years later, and JT got a job and got some money and got himself a starter box and started painting Warhammer. And after he had a starter box painted with a couple Space Marines and some bikes for them and some Necrons for them to fight. And he invited me over and my significant other, and we all sat down together and played Warhammer 40k for a little bit. And I was like, this is a lot of fun. And over the next week, we talked about it for a bit, and I started looking at the price of things, and I was like, oh, okay, this is going to be some money, but Magic the Gathering, the boxes for Magic now are through the roof, and whereas that was something that I used to spend money on. When a new set would come out, I'd drop some money buying some boxes. I'm not exactly thrilled with some of the things that Hasbro's done as of recent. I have a lot of friends that are in the D&D space, and they're not happy with the way Hasbro's handled some things. And I being in the Magic space and having a lot of friends in the Magic space, don't think that a lot of the LOTR cards and sending Pinkertons to people's houses and charging people $1,000 for a proxy, four packs of proxy cards are good business practices. It's a business where I think you really need to keep the people that play the game happy, and they're the ones that are going to continue to buy your product instead of people that are buying it just for the sake of a collective value. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. Buy on, whatever. Do your thing. But I think that companies really need, if you're going to do something as big as Dungeons and Dragons and have something as big as Magic the Gathering under your belt, then I really think that you need to show the players the proper respect that they deserve. And I don't think that Hasbro currently is. And I think that really made, the way that they handled a lot of the release for Lord of the Rings made me jump to 40k pretty quickly. I spent a lot of time watching YouTube videos and reading PDFs about different armies until I was finally ready to buy a combat patrol that I felt comfortable enough to enjoy building, painting, and playing with. And I like to think of 40k is a 3-step process, and I'll probably mention this in other episodes. I will definitely mention this in other episodes, but Warhammer 40k is a 3-step process, and it's building, painting, and playing. And those are the 3 things that you need to keep in mind when you want to get into this hobby. I'd say those are 3 of the most important things. That it doesn't have to be, other than playing. I mean, playing is obviously a social part of this hobby. I like to paint with my friends. It's kind of, at first it seems a little weird because you're just sitting around with your friend, that, say you'd play Magic with or play video games with or whatever, exercise with, and you're just sitting there with them, and the 2 of you are hyper focused, or 3 of you, however many of us there are at any given point, and we're all sitting there over our pots and our palettes, and we're painting, and we're not saying a word to each other, and we're just sitting there listening to some music, or sometimes it's a YouTube video or another podcast, and it's serene. It's odd at first to just kind of think that you're sitting there with other people and just enjoying complete silence, just sharing a hobby with them while you're building or painting. But you also, it's kind of like getting a little insight into their world, what eventually you're going to be fighting. Like you're looking at an army, get formed, as at the same time you're sitting there putting, detail and layers and dry brushing your minis, looking over, like, oh, how are they assembling theirs, and how are they building theirs, and what points are they going to use, and what guns are they going to have on them. And it's such an interesting hobby with so many nuances, and I'm glad that I don't want to use the term jump ship. I don't want to make it sound like I don't play Magic anymore. I mean, I still get together with my friends once a week and play MTG. That's never going to stop. I absolutely love playing TCGs, and I absolutely love MTG. It's one of my absolute favorites. There's plenty of great card games out there. I mean, Cards Against Humanity, Boss Monster, Death Angel, Elder Sign, Star Realms is an absolutely great tabletop card game if you want to just sit down and play something fun that you can just go and have these great games from anywhere from 2 to 4 players and just keep adding expansions to it. Same with a game like Boss Monster. I mean, you can buy into it for fairly cheap and then buy expansions for it if you want. And then there's plenty of TCGs out there. There's a TCG for everyone. Anyways, back to Warhammer. That's what we're here to talk about, is 40k. And like I said, here we are 5 years later, and I've decided to pick up and buy an Eldari Combat Patrol, and JT was gracious enough to help me glue and go over all the weapon stats, and it's good to have a guru when you're getting into the hobby. But they were pretty fresh in the hobby too. JT was pretty fresh to the hobby when they brought me in, so now I'm here, and I think one of the things that I really, really want to do with this podcast is just help all the people like me that just, are coming into this hobby and then don't, fully understand, the 3-step process, the building, the painting, the playing. Are you going to walk into the store and buy a combat patrol because it looks, awesome, and then realize that all the core rules for this, or the way that, you have some vision that you want to paint it a certain way, and it's just not doable. And I mean, then there's all the paints and all the brushes. I mean, it's more than just buying a combat patrol. It's buying a combat patrol, and then do you need to buy the indexes? Should you go online and get the PDFs and download them for free? Where are the PDFs? And things like that, and what is available and what isn't available, and how to get at those things, and what you can use and what are substitutes and what works in the meantime until you have what you need. I think those are some things that I'd like to cover in this podcast as well. I never thought that I would enjoy assembly and painting, and I will say in the beginning, assembly was very frustrating. I wasn't thrilled with the process of sitting there, and then just when I thought I got the hang of it, I bought a Wraith Blades, a unit of Wraith Blades, and trying to glue. Gosh, you have less than a 2mm margin of error while gluing those hands on, and you have to sit there probably holding it because the axe is, the plastic of the axe is heavier, and it's not going to sit there with the glue. So I mean, I must have sat there with each hand for a good 12 to 15 minutes, and that's just, there's an amount of time that goes into this hobby as well that I don't think may be quite as evident going into it. When you're playing a 500-point combat patrol game, I have had games last 2.5 hours. Mainly they last about an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes. I just finished my Eldrad, and I'm looking forward to my first 1,000-point game. The people that I play with the most have been painting up to 1,000, and like I said, I'm looking forward to. My last 100 points was an Eldrad for my Oathway of the Eldari, which like I said, I started with the Combat Patrol, and I've been playing the Combat Patrol. I really enjoy playing the Space Elves. They are an absolute blast, and Oathway is awesome. They're just a really cool faction to get into, and to be perfectly honest, it's I think I picked it mainly because I really like red and black, and just thought I could substitute all the bone color for gold, and I've got quite a nice gilded Oathway army. I will say that if I told you the order that I painted the units in, you could probably tell. Because I think there was a natural progression to the skill, and there's some things that I would learn on a later model, and then I'd go back and try to slap it onto another model and use that technique, and it's been a fun journey, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun to cover it and to go over it and discuss it. I want to talk about things like exactly, how much is this going to cost me? I want to talk about things like, well, how should you choose your army, and how should you go about doing that? I want to talk about building. Obviously, it's something that I just talked about, and how frustrating it can be, and how to get over some of those frustrations, and some tips just on how to get better at gluing and spruing in general. And then painting. I definitely want to talk about painting. Playing. I want to talk about playing, and I want to talk about games. I don't know that I want to get into the rules so much. The rules change so often. I happen to be very lucky, and if you're, starting off this podcast, with me, then I hope that you feel the same way. Starting off with 10th edition, the first 2 games I played of Warhammer were 9th edition, and now that I've seen 10th, and I've been playing 10th for about a month and a half, 2 months now, I really like 10th better, and I think it's just, it's not, I don't want to be like, boo-hoo, 9th was overcomplicated, but there's a lot of things that just 10th just streamlines. I think that that's an improvement, not anything to, complain about. It fixed something that was wrong with the game that pre-existed, and ironed out things. I think that nothing's perfect, and I don't want to spend time getting into debates with people over, this rule for this unit. I just think that there are plenty of channels on YouTube and plenty of podcasts that already do things like that. I think that there are lots of podcasts and lots of channels that talk about lore. I don't think that lore is going to be a main subject of this podcast. I'm not saying that, projects in the future won't, or that this podcast at certain points won't talk about lore, because how are you going to talk about Warhammer 40k and not talk about, the Grimdark, right? Like, you're gonna have to get into it. We're gonna have to talk about a little bit of lore here. That for sure is gonna happen, especially if we're gonna do, an episode about choosing an army and talking about armies and things like that. There's a lot to talk about there, and there's a lot of potential for conversations with any army that you would pick in Warhammer 40k. So, let's see if there's anything else I want to touch on. I think I've laid down most of, the manifesto of the 40k Parley podcast. I hope this gives you a nice introduction into who I am. I hope you like my silky smooth voice coming at you, talking about Warhammer. And, yeah, like I said, thank you for listening. This is the introductory episode of the 40k Parley podcast. And let's, like I said, let's go with Book 1, Chapter 1. I like that. I like that a lot. We do have a Patreon, and it is 40k Parley. Feel free to search the Patreon. And you know what? Give me some suggestions in the comments. Like, what's some things that I should put up on Patreon? What are some things that people would like for 40k content? What's some things that I could do to show you on Patreon that actually giving me some money to keep this hobby of ours going, to keep buying some minis, to keep buying pots of paint. Right now I just have it set to $5, and like I said, that's a pot of paint, but over the course of a year that could be a mini box, so with some, of the unit in it to paint. So something else, like I said, if you like the podcast going forward, feel free to donate on Patreon and let me know what you'd like to, hear me talk about and discuss. And like I said, I don't think that I want to get too much into rules and tactics and things like that. I think there are plenty of channels for that, and I don't want this to be the lore podcast either, because there are plenty of podcasts and channels about lore. I'm not trying to get into anybody's space, or put my fingers in anybody's pie there. I just, like I said, once again, I don't think you're going to be able to talk about 40k on a podcast without talking about the Grimdark. So yeah, that's coming. So like I said, once again, thank you very much for listening to me, Red Dog, aka Red, your host for the 40k Parley podcast. And try and get another episode out to you folks as fast as I can. Thanks a lot for listening, and take care.